And welcome to Humanist Canada's webinar series. I'm Anna Popovich, Program Director with Humanist Canada and your host this afternoon. We are joined by Yasmine Mohammed, our guest speaker, and Martin Frith, President of Humanist Canada. Thank you for joining. You are attending in listen-only mode. Today's webinar will be 60 minutes in length with time allotted for Q&A at the end. If you have questions, you can submit them with the Q&A tool and we'll take them along the way or at the end. I would like to start the webinar with a quick poll. We would like to know where you're calling from. If you can take a second and complete the poll. And there you go. Looks like there was a glitch. Okay, see, most people are based in Ontario, some in BC, Alberta, and I'll just share the results. There you go. Thank you. Our guest speaker today is Yasmine Mohammed. She's a Canadian human rights activist who advocates for the rights of women living within Islamic majority countries, as well as those who struggle under religious fundamentalism. She is also the founder of Free Hearts, Free Minds, an organization that provides psychological support for free thinkers living within Muslim majority countries. Yasmin is also a college professor and a writer, and we are very pleased to have her today to talk about her book, Unveiled: How Western Liberals Empower Radical Islam. In it, she recalls her experiences growing up in a fundamentalist Islamic household and her arranged marriage to a member of Al-Qaeda. Welcome, Yasmin, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Anna. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you describe your book as a memoir, polemic, that sheds light on the religious trauma that so many women are still unable to discuss. Can you tell us in more detail what the book is about and why you wrote it?
So initially, I wrote the book just as a process for myself, a process of healing, and also because I wanted to just inject something into the conversation, not myself, but I wanted to add something to the conversation. So a few years back in 2014, there was an episode of Bill Maher, Real Time with Bill Maher, where he had Sam Harris and Ben Affleck. And on that episode, Sam Harris and Ben Affleck and Bill Maher were all talking about how in countries like Egypt, over 80% of the population feel that people like me, people that have left Islam, should be executed. And of course, that spoke to me so directly because I am of Egyptian descent and I have left Islam. So it felt like these men were, here they are on HBO talking about my life. And it was really hurtful to see Ben Affleck shut down the conversation because I was excited that I was finally being represented on national television. And then Ben Affleck comes along and thinks that he's doing a good thing by shutting down the conversation so that ex-Muslims can continue to be ignored. And so I wanted to write this book to sort of just put it out there and say, listen, there's another part of this conversation that you guys are missing. And I felt that Bill Maher and Sam Harris were being attacked simply because they're white American men. And so I thought, well, here I am, a brown Arab woman, and I'm going to say the exact same thing. And then hopefully people will listen. And I didn't want to actually put my real face and my real name out there initially, because of course, I come from that world. I know how dangerous it is. We all know how dangerous it is, right? We're all familiar with Islamic terrorism all over the world. We all know about Salman Rushdie, Ayaan Hirsi Ali, Charlie Hebdo. You know, this is not something that is, you know, not mainstream knowledge. But I intimately knew, like you said, I was married to a member of Al-Qaeda, so I intimately understood the danger that I was putting myself into. But I felt compelled to do it because once I started writing my book, I started getting contacted by people all over the world that were saying, like, I really relate to your story. This is exactly what I went through. I'm so glad that you're living in a free country where you can say these things, because I'm living in, you know, Saudi Arabia or Sudan or Somalia or Afghanistan or Pakistan, and they can't speak freely. And so that's when I felt that I should put my name and my face out there and do this more publicly, as opposed to just writing the book and trying to throw the book out there into the conversation and keeping myself safe behind an anonymous blog. I thought, well, it's more meaningful now to put myself out there because I'm in a safe country and I'm in the position where I can do that. And there are millions and millions of people who are not.
So you say that it's polemic. Why do you say that? And what was the reception like?
So it's a polemic because it is speaking up against the Western liberals who support radical Islam. Now, I don't think that they do it on purpose, as you'll see in my book, but I think that it comes from a place of just, you know, intense ignorance, unfortunately. Islam is the second largest religion on the planet, but unfortunately people just don't know enough about it. And so they end up doing things that support, they think that they're supporting Muslims in general, but what they're doing actually is they're supporting fundamentalist Islam. And so that's one of the groups that I'm speaking against in the book. And then of course, I'm speaking against the religion of Islam in general. So as a humanist, as an atheist, I don't believe in any religions, but I believe that everybody has the right to practice whatever religion they want in the comfort of their own homes and in the comfort of their religious places. But I don't think that religion has any place in government. I don't think it has any place in public education. And a lot of the experiences that I had and a lot of the people that relate to me are experiences where there have been, you know, it's like Sharia, it's Islamic law that demands, you know, the certain things that is completely against any basic human rights.
And jumping into the story, into your book. So your mother was raised in Egypt in an affluent family in a fairly tolerant religious environment. She relocated to Canada, and after separating from her first husband, your father, she embraced radical Islam. And this is sort of the beginning of your story. You do not describe in detail what your mother's life was like in Egypt, but I was struck by the contrast between the relaxed and privileged atmosphere in which your mother is raised in Egypt and the harsh conditions of her life as a new immigrant in Canada, which set the context for her encounter with radical Islam, if I'm reading this correctly.
Mm-hmm.
So why does your mother decide to abandon a place of comfort and move to Canada, right? And this is a question about just immigration in general, something that I've been thinking about lately.
Yeah, so I think that the fallacy is that people leave these Islamic countries or Muslim majority countries because they have a problem with the Islam part of it. No, that's not the issue necessarily. Sometimes it's true, absolutely. But generally it's for economic reasons, it's for safety reasons, it's for better healthcare, it's for better opportunities for their children. It's just, you know, Egypt is an overpopulated country with very few opportunities. My mother, like you said, came from like the upper crust society. And so in order to move on up, it would be, you know, the greatest thing if she moved to America, which is where her and my dad moved. And so it'd be such a point of pride for everybody in my mom's family to say, oh, our daughter is in America, my aunt is in America, you know. It's like the pinnacle of it. So it's kind of this, it's interesting because the love-hate relationship started in Egypt with this push with the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, it initially started with Abdel Nasser, but there was like this push to push against anything Western. It wasn't like that initially. In the beginning, they were, they were happy to celebrate Western, Enlightenment values, Western movies, Western music, Western clothing. All of that stuff was put up on a pedestal. But then things started to change with it was like a political push to encourage people, like, the Muslim Brotherhood started in Egypt. It started with Hassan al-Banna, who really, his main message was, he didn't even want Egyptians to wear jeans or pants anymore. He wanted them to dress like Muslims. And so it was just this push against everything that was Western. And so when my mom was growing up, that push wasn't there. And then it started later. And that's why by the time she was here in Canada, she was hating everything Western a lot more than she did when she was younger.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, Yasmin. We've got a lot of people who are just saying they can't see you. You're not frozen on my screen, but I'm just wondering if you could stop and restart your video. And
sure, I'll do that.
And yes, we've got 76 people on the call. Okay.
Is it working? Can you see
so
me?
Wave your hands and can people, can you let us know if you're able to see Yasmin? Okay. And okay. And others had said they couldn't see you. So, okay. Well, do you know what? There have been issues with Zoom globally today. So let's see if, but you're certainly live here. So let's carry on then. And sorry for the interruption.
No problem. I can see you.
Martin.
Yep. Okay. So Yasmin, you lived in Egypt for a while. What was your experience like there?
Well, it was shocking for me to see how much the difference between the world that I was living in Canada and the world in Egypt in terms of Islam. So I had never met a Muslim woman that didn't wear hijab until I went to Egypt. It was quite embarrassing, actually, because it was my aunt's neighbor who had this gorgeous red hair. And I asked her, "Are you Muslim?" And she was like insulted. And it was this big thing. My aunt and my mom and everybody was involved. And they're like, "Why would you ask her if she was Muslim? That's so embarrassing." And everybody's all upset at this girl that's, asking this woman if she's Muslim. And she's like, "Why would you think I wasn't?" And so I said, "Well, you're not wearing hijab. I'd never known a Muslim woman who doesn't wear hijab before." And of course, I saw the longer I was in Egypt, there's belly dancing, there's music, there's, all sorts of people are drinking, people are just living their lives in a way that I certainly was not when I was living in Canada. And, the difference is that my mom could control my life in Canada in a way that she couldn't in Egypt. And she felt that there was, and what I mean by control my life is that she could tell me, this is what Islam is. And I would go to Islamic schools and the teachers would tell us and the imams would tell us. And the narrative that we were getting was about what Islam is. And we weren't seeing any counter narratives to that. We weren't seeing Shia Muslims. We weren't seeing Sufi Muslims. We were just seeing the Muslims that were coming to our community, were coming to our mosque, coming to our school. And so when I went to Egypt, all of a sudden I realized, oh my gosh, there's all these different variations of ways that people practice Islam. It's not only fundamentalism isn't the only way to do it. And so, you know, initially I didn't want to be in Egypt because I was left there against my will. I just woke up in the morning and poof, my family had all gone back to Canada. So I wasn't happy about being there, and I fell into a depression for about a year because I just hated it there and I wanted to go back home. But, you know, things like Ramadan in Egypt are fun as opposed to in Canada, because in Egypt, everything shuts down. The whole country is involved in Ramadan with you. And every night you go and have, you know, the breaking of the fast at a different person's house. And you're meeting new people and everybody's wearing new clothes, and there's, you know, there's fun things going on. There's tons of cookies and whatever. Whereas in Canada, you know, I'm up in the north of the world, we had to fast, like imagine in the summer, we would have to fast sometimes until 10:30 at night because you can't eat until the sun goes down. It was absolute torture. And I'd still have to go to school, and I'd still have to do, you know, everything else. World didn't flip like it did in Egypt, where all of a sudden in Egypt, everybody slept during the day and they were all awake during the night. That wasn't happening here in Canada. In Canada, I'd have to like, oh, it's time to break our fast. I'd go make myself some Mr. Noodles or something. It was, you know, a very different experience. So, you know, it was just eye-opening for me to see that the world was so much bigger than what I had been told.
Can you help us understand the context of radicalization of Islam in the Middle East and Africa? You did mention Egypt. And how would you describe Islamic fundamentalism?
So it starts in Egypt because when Islam had spread, you know, as large as it had, it was into Europe, into Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, which is the golden era that everybody, you know, all the Muslims want to return to. They were in Spain and they just can't get over the fact that they're not in Spain anymore. They're still sore about that. So they wanted to get back into Europe again. And I mentioned Hassan al-Banna, so he's the one who started the Muslim Brotherhood. And basically they were a bunch of men who sat together and they said, listen, we are not going to be able to get back into Europe the same way we did the first time around. This time around, we're going to have to do things differently. We're going to have to use diplomacy. We're going to have to use immigration. We're going to have to use different means. And so because they started in Egypt, they were strongest in Egypt. And unfortunately, they actually reached the level of, you know, Mohammed Morsi was the president of Egypt for a short amount of time before Egyptians, you know, were in the streets protesting to get him ousted, and he was ousted by the military. So there are, you know, I think it's like 20 to 25% is the statistic of people that support Islamization, that support the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. And it started in Egypt, but of course it spread all over. And what they wanted to do was to spread Islam. They identified 3 different ways that they're going to do it. Number one, through the wombs of the Muslim mothers. So that means, you know, one man marry 4 wives, get each one of them pregnant as much as possible, and then build the ummah, right? Have a bigger, you know, larger amount of Muslims. And through immigration, and through using secular laws against themselves, against itself. And so we see that kind of thing happening recently in Vancouver and in Toronto and all over Canada and all over the world, in fact, in non-Muslim countries that are not Muslim majority. They just have very small percentages of Muslims. However, they have loudspeakers on their mosques, and they are you know, they are announcing the adhan, which is announcing the supremacy of Allah in free, secular, liberal countries that are supposed to not, you know, have that kind of thing going on. Countries that are supposed to have a separation of mosque and state, or of religion and state. but they have found ways of encouraging people that these kinds of things are okay, which is, it's infuriating to me, because if you had a Catholic person say, oh, I want to have a loudspeaker and I want to yell about, you know, the supremacy of Jesus over loudspeakers, is that okay? I mean, that would never be okay. It would never be allowed. But somehow, because it's in Arabic and it's coming from an Islamic context, people don't want to criticize it because they don't want to be, as Ben Affleck calls them, gross and racist. They don't want to be considered Islamophobic. And so they bite their tongue and they don't criticize. So that's one way of how the Muslim Brotherhood is succeeding. So you have the jihadis like, you know, bin Laden on one end, and, you know, Al-Qaeda and ISIS and all of them. So they're scaring people into silence through, you know, trucks of peace, or stabbing people at different bridges in the UK, through nail bombs in the Ariana Grande concert, yada, yada, yada. We're all very familiar with how they go around the world with their violence and their terrorism and scaring people. And then on the other side, you have people scared into submission, and these are the Islamists that scare people into submission through using words like Islamophobia, bigot, hateful, racist. And that's another way of silencing criticism. And it can be just as dangerous, as we know in the UK, the rape gangs that were, I mean, thousands and thousands of girls involved in these rape gangs. And the reason why those gangs were able to perpetuate for so long was because whenever anybody spoke up against them, they would lose their job, or, you know, they would be ostracized because people would say, oh, you're being racist. How dare you speak about these Pakistani Muslims? And when they did that, they were essentially allowing cover for these young girls, some as young as 11, to continue to be raped in a systemic way.
What is the response of local populations in places like Egypt to fundamentalism from within Islam?
You know, there's kind of like it's brewing right now. It's brewing. People are fighting, not just in Egypt, but in Saudi Arabia, in Iran. My goodness, the women in Iran are absolutely phenomenal. They're really the ones that are at the forefront of this. People are fighting back. People are fighting against this fundamentalism. ISIS did so much for this, to be honest. And what I mean by that is, a lot of people were kind of just living their life. Yeah, I'm Muslim. Yeah, I don't drink. Yeah, I don't eat pork. But they didn't really understand what their religion was teaching. Islam does not encourage critical thought. It does, you know, you don't read the Quran to talk about it and to think about it and to have debates about it. No, you are encouraged to memorize it. A hafiz is the person who is celebrated. And that just means somebody who memorizes. And so you regurgitate it. You swallow this book whole and you regurgitate it. And only about 15% of the Muslim population even understand Arabic. Most of these people are regurgitating words the way somebody who was singing Italian opera, you know, they don't know what they're saying. It just sounds pretty to a lot of people because they don't know what's happening. They don't understand that these things that they say, oh, that sounds pretty. Well, actually, they're talking about how people are going to be tortured in hell for eternity. But they don't know. They just hear the sounds of these words. And so they don't know what their religion teaches. They don't understand. And then when ISIS became so prominent, people started to think, oh, that has nothing to do with Islam. And then they started researching and they realized, oh my God, this is exactly what Islam teaches. These men, ISIS, are following exactly what our Prophet Muhammad did. This is, you know, something that they didn't want. Maybe they knew at the back of their minds that it was there theoretically, but they had never had to face it. Now they were forced to face it. They're watching these Muslim men taking these Yazidi girls as sex slaves. And they're forced to say, oh my God, I'm a part of that. I am also a Muslim. And I know that feeling because that's what I went through after 9/11. I had that feeling of, oh my God, how do I identify as the same group of people as people that would do that? And that was my context because I'm over here on this side of the world. So 9/11 hit me like that. But now ISIS is over there. And so people over there are starting to, you know, they're going through that same thing where they're realizing, oh my gosh, is this really what my religion teaches? And also Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, you know, the internet in general, watching this video, watching different, you know, Christopher Hitchens, watching Richard Dawkins, watching Carl Sagan. None of this information was allowed over in those countries before. And so now they're able to see and hear different perspectives, different views. They had never heard of the Holocaust. They had been given all of this, you know, just lies about it. They didn't know about so many things that we take for granted. And over there, they're just, you know, we're talking about countries that are over 90% Muslim, sometimes 100% Muslim. And so everything you hear is from that exact same narrative. So it's kind of like the way I was when I was growing up, and I was sealed in this bubble of this is what Islam is. A lot of people are sealed in that bubble as well, but the internet has cut through that bubble, and anybody that has access to the internet now has access to information. And that's why ex-Muslims are just growing in number, like phenomenally. People are dropping Islam left, right, and center because they're finally forced to see what it actually is.
Your mother is a central figure in the book. She moves to Canada, and you say, and I quote, "She found herself alone in a new country with no support system and 3 children. She was desperately searching for a community, a support network, and unfortunately, this search led her to the local mosque. There she found that monster who offered to marry her, to make her whole, and to financially provide for her 3 children. She must have felt so alone, so abandoned, and without any belief that she had any agency as a woman, without any confidence that she could be a successful human being on her own, that she did not need a man. She saw herself as a parasite looking for hosts." And so this is a powerful passage. Would you like to comment on this desolation of being a single woman?
Yeah, I mean, that's just the desolation of being a woman in general when you're being brought up in the Muslim world or in an Islamic community. You're not an individual. You are simply an extension of first your father, so your family, and then an extension of your husband. So this is most clearly seen in countries like Saudi Arabia, where they have the guardianship laws, which is based on Quran, that says men are the guardians of women. So essentially these women have to have a prison guard. They can't do anything on their own. They're always a dependent. I mean, this woman could be a grandmother and she's still a dependent of a man. And so women are never full individuals. They're never full human beings. And we are taught not only that we are always lesser than, second class, subservient to a man, but our only role really is to, you know, to be a good obedient daughter, and then to be a good obedient wife, and to make babies, to grow the ummah, to grow the community of Muslims. So, you know, like that's all my mom ever knew. That's all society ever values, is the husband that you're going to take and the children that you're going to make. My father would, you know, he's like, we're immigrants now, we have to work hard, things are different, I need you to take a job. She didn't want to work because she had been told her whole life that a man would take care of her. And she didn't, it was too much for her to even imagine taking care of herself. It just never crossed her mind. It would be, yeah, it was just too far outside of the realm of possibility of how she saw herself. And it's sad and it's unfortunate, and it's, you know, something that has taken me many years to be able to look back and try and empathize with how she was feeling or how she was raised. Because I just saw her as weak and it made me angry that she always needed to be attached to a man. And it made me angry that she wasn't willing to stand on her own 2 feet. I mean, sure, I'm born and raised in a very fundamentalist family, but I'm in a bubble. I can see outside of that bubble, and I can see how women live. And I can see that there is an opportunity, that there's a choice, that she could choose to be a strong, independent woman, but she just was not capable of doing that.
Would you say that there's a connection between exile and radicalization?
Yeah, somewhat there is. And the reason for that is when Muslims go to non-Muslim countries or countries that are not Muslim majority, they feel a greater sense of urgency to make sure that they don't lose their children to the infidels, that they don't lose their children to the, the heathens in the West. They don't want their kids to pick up liberal ideas. And so that's why, if I used to teach at a college in Qatar, which is in the Middle East, just off of Saudi Arabia. Some of the listeners might be familiar with the country, teeny tiny country. And they have universities like Virginia Commonwealth, Texas A&M, University of Calgary, all sorts of universities have opened their campuses in their country. And the reason for that is they want their kids to get these prestigious Western educations, but they want to keep them safe in a Muslim country. If they notice that when they send their kids to Germany or to America or to Canada or whatever to get educated, they come back with all of these crazy liberal ideas, and they share those ideas with their family or with their neighbors or with their friends and with their community. And it was starting to cause problems with the society that wanted them to just hear this one narrative. And so countries like Qatar have the money to build campuses in their countries so that they can educate their kids, but also keep them hidden away from the non-Muslims. So in examples, when ISIS started up, for example, you saw people from like Berlin and Germany and America and Canada, many people from Canada, unfortunately, were going there. Like, why are you leaving this? You're a university educated person living in a free country, and you're going to burn your passport and go join a terrorist organization in Syria? Like, how does that make sense? And that's because you are, even though you're living here, you are being always taught repeatedly, like every Friday at the mosque. And who knows, for some people, it's a lot more. Like for me, it was a lot more at home all the time. You're constantly being taught that your allegiance is to the Muslim Ummah. Your allegiance is to the Muslim community. So they would say things like, just because you're born in a barn doesn't mean you're a horse. So just because you're born in the UK doesn't mean you're British. You are not. You are one of us. They are them. And so there's always this constant us and them. And when you're living in a society where you feel, victimized because you're surrounded by the enemy, it sort of, it accentuates all of those us and them things. And that's a normal human reaction. I mean, when I was living in Qatar, I celebrated Canada Day like a crazy person. I mean, we had Canada Day cakes, we had Canada Day flags, we had Canada Day, we went nuts. And that's because we were so far away from Canada. But once we came back to Canada, we barely do anything. We have a barbecue, we don't do that much. But it's because we don't really have to I didn't feel like I had to push the identity of being a Canadian on my children when I'm here in Canada. And so it's kind of that same thing. They're feeling like we are far away from an Islamic world. My kids are surrounded by all of these non-Muslim opinions and ideas. So I have to really drill into them constantly about how they are the enemy and, Muslims stick together. And so that, of course, encourages fundamentalism and eventually radicalization in some cases.
So you mentioned,
Oh, it's Martin, and sorry to interrupt again. And Yasmin, a perfect opportunity to grab a drink of water, but you're frozen again. Could you, it seemed the last time it was successful to restart your video.
Okay,
And
so
uh,
stop and start.
Sure. And I think for all of our listeners is that you may not know that Zoom had some global outages this morning, and it seems there are still some issues with the Zoom platform. Um, so there you go. You're back and you're moving again, Yasmin.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks, Martin.
Thank you, Martin.
So you mentioned in your book the term gender apartheid. I'm wondering if there are a lot of Muslim feminists, writers, activists, scholars who confront patriarchal Islam through a feminist reading of the Quran. And here are just a couple of excerpts from scholars that I found online. So while the veil could be a sign of oppression, in other contexts, the veil has more complicated meanings. For instance, the veil in Algeria became a sign of anti-colonial resistance. And another one that says Islamic feminists aim to produce an alternative to secular feminism, which excludes any form of religious reference. In other words, we support women's rights, but we want to remain within Islam because we want to preserve the ethnic bond, and this is a form of community solidarity. So can you address these points?
So I think that in general, that's a positive thing. It's kind of like probably how how Christians felt when they were trying to support LGBT equality, but there was so much in the religion that was against it. So, now you can go to a church and they have a rainbow flag on the door. So things have really progressed, obviously. This is the same sort of thing, but they're going to have a much bigger hurdle in front of them. So if you're going to try and be a feminist Muslim, you have a big job ahead of you because there is so much. I mean, this is not like, these are not readings that can be possibly interpreted one way or interpreted the other. I mean, there's very clear things where, the Prophet Muhammad says, women are less intelligent than men. More women will be in hell than men. Men are, must control their wives. And if their wives if they fear that, this is from the Quran, if you fear that your wives might be arrogant or disobedient, then you go through these steps and eventually you beat them into submission. So all the power to these women that are trying to push these boundaries and to try and be a feminist and a Muslim at the same time. I mean, I know a lot of people that are gay and Muslim at the same time. And this is a religion that teaches that if you are gay, you should be executed. And in fact, a dozen countries around the world will execute you for being gay. So this isn't just theoretical. This is real life. This is codified in law. And so that's what I mean when I say they're going to have a big hurdle ahead of them to try and convince, over 1 billion people that they can read Islam with a feminist reading. I mean, good for them. Go for it. But, when you have over 50 Muslim majority countries that have Sharia in their laws that state that women are very clearly not equal to men, then, it's a big job.
And now you rebel against the veil as a child, as an adult, and in fact, wearing the veil seems to be part of what you describe as a traumatic religious experience. But a lot of women choose to wear hijab, so it must be meaningful to them in a positive way. And I'm asking this question as a complete outsider to Islam.
Yeah.
So can you comment on that? And also, in your opinion, is there a difference between wearing a hijab and a niqab?
Okay, so I'll answer the first question first. So, you know, back in China, how they used to bind a woman's feet so that it was all gnarly and tiny. Now, objectively, we can look at that and say, okay, that's a horrific thing to do to a human being's body. Now, part of the reason why they would do that, and they would have a big step so that a woman couldn't leave the house on her own. So there were misogynist reasons, but there probably were, you know, I could probably find you some older grandma somewhere or great grandma that would say, oh, I love my dainty feet. I think it was a great thing to do. It made my shoes really small. It doesn't matter if individual people find these kinds of things to be positive. The fact of the matter is, it is not. It is harmful, not just physically for these women, but psychologically as well. Or if you take a look at the, you know, the whalebone corsets that women used to wear in Europe, sure, they would faint because they weren't able to breathe properly. You know, we know that it was dangerous for their bodies. It would cause them all sorts of, their internal organs sometimes would get completely messed up. But I'm sure you would find lots of women that would say, but I love my little waist, but I like looking dainty. It's irrelevant, you know, so the hijab is the same sort of thing. Just because you have, you know, I can't speak for over 1 billion women. I don't know, you know, how many, why they chose to wear hijab. Maybe they are wearing it because they're forced into it at the age of 6 or 7 when they're told that good girls will go to heaven if they wear hijab, and dirty, filthy girls will get raped and then burn in hell for the rest of eternity if they don't wear hijab. Maybe those kinds of coercive methods were what encouraged her to wear hijab when she was young. And then by the time she got older, she doesn't have the option of taking it off, of course. And, or, you know, maybe she converted to Islam and she decided that she wanted to wear this. You know, one woman that I know converted to Islam, decided she wanted to wear it because she was sexually abused and she felt like this protects her from, you know, men looking at her. And it's the same reason why she gained an excessive amount of weight as well. There's psychological reasons that why every individual person is going to choose to do these kinds of things. All I can speak to is the ideology of hijab itself, the reason why the hijab exists. Hijab is there, the purpose for it is for victim blaming and slut shaming. It's a perpetuation of rape culture. It's a physical representation of that gender apartheid, of that subjugation of women that I've been talking about. Women are considered completely sexual beings. So their face is no different from their breasts. Their hair is no different than their vagina. It's all aura. In fact, even their voice should be hidden away from men. Women should not be seen nor heard. All they're good for is for making babies. And the hijab, when I fight against it, I'm not fighting against the individual women that choose to wear hijab. I'm fighting against the ideology of why they wear it. So it's the exact same thing of when I was talking about ISIS and Muslims finally realizing, oh my God, is that what the religion is? The same sort of thing is happening with when I talk about the hijab. And so one woman that I was speaking to, she used to work at a rape crisis center and she wore hijab. She was volunteering at a rape crisis center and she's learning all of this information about victim blaming, slut shaming, rape culture. And she's hearing, you know, my tweets or reading my tweets and hearing my interviews. And she realizes, oh my gosh, I'm a part of this. Here I am teaching one thing to these poor girls who have been victimized. And I am perpetuating that culture that has victimized them. And so I think that that's important, that education is important. We are coerced into these things when we are young children. We don't know any better. We're told, you know, we're given comparisons like a covered up lollipop that's clean. Wouldn't you prefer to eat the clean lollipop versus this filthy lollipop that's covered in bugs and flies? So these are the kinds of messages that we're told as a little girl, 6 or 7-year-old girl. And so we have not ever had the opportunity to think about it and to consider it and to learn about it from the perspective of an adult. And so that's why I speak out against the hijab. I want the women that have chosen to take it off to know that I'm in solidarity with them, that we are in solidarity with them, that there are a lot of people that are standing with them, because I know that they're dealing with a lot of backlash from their community and their family. And so I want to be here like as a cheerleader for them. And also to educate Muslim women as to why they're wearing that, and to let them examine if that's something that they actually want to do or not. And also to educate the Western world, who think that putting this tool of rape culture on the cover of magazines and on Barbie's head and putting a Nike swoosh on it, let them understand how they are betraying feminism when they do that. How you have women over here saying, we want to free the nipple, but somehow those same women will support women that fight against hijab, and women that just want to free their face, women that just want to free their hair. So if you really want to be a feminist and involved in sisterhood solidarity, then you would help women that are fighting against these patriarchal tools. You wouldn't ever support them or celebrate them. And as far as the difference between hijab and niqab, it's the same spectrum. So when you wear hijab, and you can easily Google image constantly, there's so much criticism all the time about women telling them that they have to wear their hijab better. That means it's too tight, the colors are too bright, your bangs are showing, your neck is showing, your ears are showing, I can see the shape of your legs. You know, there's just this constant push, 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 push. And the end of that is to be covered head to toe in black. Can't even see my eyes, can't even, you know, I wore gloves, I wore thick socks. So I reached the end of that. You know, the constant criticism pushes you into that direction. And so hijab and niqab, I mean, hijab is basically, niqab is included in when I say the word hijab, but in the West, the word hijab is used for everything but the face and hands. But hijab basically just means separation, means covering. And so that can be done, you know, all the way from somebody who wears it like turban style, or just like a beanie or something, all the way to the way you see it in Afghanistan, with just like one piece of cloth from the top of her head down to her feet, which is what it should be. It should not show the shape of a woman at all, not even her shoulders. So it should go from here all the way down. And so that's what's constantly being pushed.
Okay, let's go to questions now. Martin.
Hey, so we have several questions. And Yasmin, thank you. This is very provocative. And if I could ask one that I've been mulling about, and that is that it's been interesting, the mixed response on Bill 21 in Canada. So I was wondering, from your perspective, what is your commentary right now on Bill 21? You know, deeply flawed legislation seen by many, but.
So I think the problem with Bill 21 is people think that it has something to do with Islam. Muslims, women in hijab have somehow made it about themselves. It has nothing to do with them. Bill 21 is, you know, it's because Catholicism in Quebec has historically really been, you know, infringing on people's personal freedoms. So I spoke to a man who grew up in Quebec, and he was telling me that his grandmother would have the priest visit and tell her, you know, it's been a while since you've made some babies. Did you look at this verse in the Bible? Like, you know, you should be making some babies. And so, like, really infringing on people's privacy. And so that, you know, and we know this from French people in general, you know, before Quebec even, that they are very strongly secularists, very strong secular liberals. They really want a very clear distinction between church and state. And I 100% support that. I'm completely for that as well. And so I think Bill 21 is just in support of that. And I you know, I'm always going to be in support of removing religion from anywhere near government.
Okay, thank you. let me just look. There's a number of, there was a question, how did you get into an arranged marriage? And then how did you get out? And then, you know, what's the standing of your relationship with your family of origin now?
So we really don't have time for me to explain how I got in or how I got out. So I'm just going to have to plug my book. If that, honestly, it's really a long story. You can imagine.
Okay.
It's like how I got in is like a boiling frog. You know, it's a long, slow process. And how I got out was just by the skin of my teeth. But in my book, I detail exactly how that happened. And as far as the last question, I have not seen my mother since 2004. I have no communication with my immediate family. I have one cousin who married a Jewish man, and so she was disowned by my family. So she's my family now. She's the only, she's my only family member because she's also an ex-Muslim. And she lives in Seattle. And I had, you know, she was just my mom and her dad are half siblings. So I didn't really know her growing up, but so I just found her very recently. And so that's been really wonderful because now I get to have family. And I have one uncle who speaks to me because him and my mom are estranged. So that's why I get him. And he's still a Muslim, but he accepts me. You know, he doesn't try to push me in any direction. He's always been a very, you know, just like a cultural Muslim. Like he's a Muslim just because his family is, but he was never really practicing anyway. So him and my cousin are my only family.
Right. Does this uncle, does he live in Canada or?
He lives in New York.
Okay. So
yeah.
He's westernized.
And he's, yeah, completely westernized. Yeah.
Okay. A question, how do you balance encouraging proper scrutiny of Islam with the very real phenomenon of anti-Muslim hate?
Yeah, you know, that's going to be a constant issue that I feel is not, you know, people seem to think that it's a reason to stop criticism is because anti-Muslim hate can happen as a result. But I completely disagree with that. I think that we have to, unfortunately, I'm always fighting more than one battle at the same time. I've got, you know, people on the left, which are just completely ignorant about Islam. They have their hearts in the right place, but just their minds need to catch up. They need to understand that this ideology is something to be fighting against in the same way they fight against evangelical Christians. And then I have the Muslims themselves that hate me because I'm speaking out against their religion, and a lot of them feel very closely identified with that religion, so they take it as personal insults when I speak against the religion. And then I have people on the right that think that I am, you know, a stupid, you know, insert racial slur here. I get called all sorts of things. You're just a closeted jihadi. Once a Muslim, always a Muslim. You know, nobody cares what you have to say. Go back where you came from. So, you know, I'm getting it from all angles all the time. And then I'm going to continue to do this because I think it's really important, and there's not enough voices coming from this direction. And when people tell me, however, there could be some anti-Muslim bigotry as a result of this, I say, yes, there could be, and we just have to continue to fight against bigotry from all angles and fight against ignorance from all angles, but that doesn't mean that we should stop talking.
Mm-hmm. Well put, thank you. Looking at education, how can our public schools engage with students and parents to alert them to the dangers of radicalism and radicalization? Canadian young people are, it seems, are being drawn into this deadly web.
Yeah. So, you know, some people get really upset, like, you know, in Florida, in the States, they have in their curriculum, I think it's grade 10 history or something like that, to teach about Islam. And some people are getting upset about that. They're like, oh, they're taking my kids to the mosque. They're making my daughter put a scarf on her head to go for this field trip. And my response is that's actually a good thing, because it allows these kids the opportunity to say, why do only girls have to wear a scarf? Why do girls have to stand in the back and boys in the front? I want them to see this gender segregation. I want them to understand what this religion is teaching. I think that there's nothing wrong with teaching. In fact, I encourage people to learn as much as they can about Islam. The Quran is on the internet, translated into any language that you speak. Read it, please. Go to sunnah.com and read the hadith. Read the kinds of things that it teaches there. Get educated about the second largest religion on the planet. It's not just over there, it's over here now. And so it's you know, it's important that you don't, you know, like when I was growing up, there were these silly things, you know, walk like an Egyptian. There was Aladdin that was full of all of this weird, are they in India or are they in Arabia? What's happening? You know, there's a lot of mixed confusion in the Western world about, you know, the Islamic world. And that was fine and dandy because it didn't matter, you know. But after 9/11, it matters now. It really matters. It's important for people to understand. Over 50 countries in this world are Muslim majority. Like I said, second largest religion on the planet. At this point, ignorance is really a choice because everything is available on the internet. And I think that people should get educated and take the initiative, if it's not in the curriculum in the schools here in Canada, which it isn't, or in different provinces, then take the initiative to learn about it and understand it yourself. Understand why in the UK, when they had this new curriculum that was called No Outsiders, and basically what they were teaching was whether you are Black or white or Muslim or gay or straight, we're all in this together. We are all British and there will be no outsiders. But then, why did you have hundreds of Muslim families chanting outside of the school, being gay is not okay? And they were totally against this curriculum being taught across the UK. That's the kind of thing that needs to happen. People need to understand this is what the religion is teaching so that they can understand that they need to also fight against it in the same way that they would fight against any other homophobe or bigot or racist or, you know, closed-minded person that is saying those kinds of things. I can't.
Martin, you're muted.
Oh, my apologies. Yes, so lots to mull on, Yasmin. I know we're approaching the end of our hour together, and we still have more questions. So I'm wondering, with some of them, if we could ask you to respond to in a follow-up.
Sure, absolutely.
So let me come back to, we have, you certainly have lots here are singing your praises, by the way. And so here, this is an interesting question from someone for whom you're a huge hero of hers, or his, Jason Smith. Do you have any stories where you were able to wake people up?
Oh, yes, many stories. I'm very grateful. Those are the stories that keep me going. I mean, if I have woken you up, please send me a message and let me know, because there are so many days where I just feel like I'm yelling into an abyss and it's very frustrating. But those messages keep me going. They are the, you know, the fuel in my fire that keeps me just pushing forward. Yeah, absolutely. I'm very grateful to get messages from people who, Muslim people who are, you know, that were finally, you know, sometimes it's a slow process. Like first she'll remove her hijab, then she'll learn more about Islam, and then she'll eventually leave Islam. I don't really care that people leave Islam. That's not my goal. My goal is for people to just understand and to get educated and to feel like they are being supported in whatever decision they choose to make. And lots of people as well from the left that have, you know, especially after Sam Harris's podcast, I was able to reach a lot of people that have said, I never thought about it from that perspective. I didn't see it like that. And you're absolutely correct. And now I feel ashamed that, you know, that I saw Muslim women as a completely different species. But you're right, they're just like us. You know, I don't want to be forced into wearing a tool of rape culture. Why would she want to be forced into it? I wouldn't celebrate it if it was happening over here. Why should I celebrate it for them? And so those kinds of things are really heartwarming.
Right. And I guess, you know, a goal of when people know they have choices, then at least there's a freedom to be able to choose.
That's it.
So a last question then, and it's a bit long, but it's an interesting question. Can you address how Western women can help support Muslim women? I've often heard you criticize Western feminists for not speaking out against the oppression of women in Islam, as well as the hijab. I'm a Western woman, and when I speak out openly about the hijab or about the oppression of women and LGBT in Islam, I'm sometimes called racist or Islamophobic. Muslim women often say that they don't want Western feminists speaking out for them or trying to save them, that they can't truly understand, that Western women can't truly understand their plight because they have white Western privilege, and it's condescending to think that they should speak out for them. So personally, I feel very conflicted about what is the most effective way to help Muslim women without being accused of being either racist or condescending.
That is a really great question that I tried to delve deeply into in my book, but I will, you know, back when Anna said something about sometimes women wear hijab as an anti-colonial thing. They also wear it these days as an anti-Trump thing, but really it sometimes it gets used as a tool of, it's basically anti-Western. So, and then anti-Western means more Muslim, but these play on words that women do, that Muslim women do now, where they try to speak to feminists and they say, this is my experience, don't tell me about my experience. You can't understand it because you have white skin, and so you can't possibly know what it's like for me, or whatever it is. This is the example of the Muslim Brotherhood when they said using secular laws against itself. This is what they're really doing. So, you know, what they're doing is they're using the current political climate of the day to push the same agenda. At the end of the day, I don't want anyone to go around and try to save Muslim women, because Muslim women don't feel like they want to be saved. That's their business. If they want to, whatever they want to do with their lives, that's their business. What I do want them to know is that if they do decide to take off the hijab, or if they do decide to leave the abusive husband, or if they do decide not to marry the man that their family is forcing them to marry, that there is a support system here for them. So I don't want, like, I've had people say, like, can I go, I have a Muslim woman working in my building, I want to give her my book. And I'm like, don't give her my book. Don't do that. Like it's like a Jehovah's Witness coming to your door when you're trying to have, you know, lunch with your family, and they're coming and they're like, here's a pamphlet, read about this. Nobody wants that. Let people live their lives, do what they want to do. Mind, you know, everybody can mind their own business, but we need to make sure that we have a inclusive and open and comfortable environment for people who choose not to be a part of that they can come out and know that they're embraced and that they're supported. But unfortunately, the opposite happens. You know, so for me, like, I know we're running out of time. I'm just going to give this really quick example. For me, when I was growing up, I had people like Gloria Steinem and all of these prominent feminists that were speaking, Madonna, I mean, not that I'm a fan of her music, but she was speaking up against these patriarchal religious constructs. And that's what I grew up in, with these strong feminists speaking out against religion and speaking out against patriarchy. But now it's like we speak out against religious patriarchy, but not Islamic religious patriarchy. That one we can't touch. That one is, you know, if you talk about it, then you're a racist and a bigot. That's what we need to change. We need to continue to talk about it. We need to get our voices louder, stronger. I know they're going to try and shut you down by calling you a racist and an Islamophobe. Like I said earlier in this webinar, you know, they're going to shut you down with, you know, like they did with Charlie Hebdo, by actually killing you, or they're going to shut you down by calling you an Islamist, or sorry, an Islamophobe and a racist and a bigot. All of it is for the same end. It's because they don't want this criticism to happen. They don't want this conversation to happen. And when you get bullied into silence, you're allowing them to win. And so luckily you're not living in a country like Pakistan or Afghanistan or in Saudi Arabia, where you could be imprisoned or killed or hacked to death in the streets like non-Muslims are in Bangladesh, people that speak out against Islam. You're not in any of those really dangerous environments where people still remarkably still do speak up. You're in an environment where you are safely behind your keyboard on Facebook or on Twitter or at work or with your, you know, a lunch with your friends or your family, and where you can carefully explain that you are against these ideologies because their values are against your values. You're not against the homophobia in Islam because you hate gay people. That doesn't make any sense. You're against it because you care about gay Muslims. You're against the misogyny in Islam, not because you hate Muslim women, but because you care that women should be allowed to have the freedom to do whatever they want and not get imprisoned because they're not putting a piece of cloth on their head. So you're lucky enough that you can explain yourself slowly and carefully, and please just keep doing it. I know that it's a treacherous thing to do, and it's scary, but please don't be silenced. You know, just find a different angle, and, you know, share videos, share the movie Wajda, which is a movie about a girl in Saudi Arabia who just wants to ride a bicycle. You know, that's not allowed because you might lose your virginity. I didn't learn to ride a bike until I got one for my 40th birthday from my husband, right? I'm not kidding. We're not allowed, we're raised like veal. We're not allowed to do anything because it's all about preserving your virginity to be passed over to your husband. So there's a movie called Wajda, which is just about a girl that wants to ride a bicycle. Let them watch that movie. Let them watch the movie called Honor Diaries, which is many Muslim women and non-Muslim and ex-Muslim that are talking about the honor culture in Islam and how there's so much pressure on women and girls, and how that's why the honor violence happens and the honor killings happen all over. Let them watch Banaz, A Love Story, which is a documentary done by Dia Khan. Let them watch and learn and understand. Share my book with them if they're willing. Let them watch and learn and understand that we are just human beings, that we are growing up little girls just like they were growing up little girls, that when we fight for our freedom and our autonomy, it's no different than a girl over here fighting for her freedom and for her autonomy. The difference is we could be compared more to like the suffragettes that existed way before any of us were born. That's where we're at. Women are just wanting to be seen as equal members of society. And for you to be silenced because somebody's going to call you bad words instead of speaking up against these systems is something that's really sad, because people are literally being imprisoned and killed all over the world because they are fighting against these systems. And so we would really, really appreciate your support. And when I say that, I think it's important to note that when I criticize Western feminists, I don't begrudge them fighting for, you know, against manspreading or, you know, minutia, things like that. Go ahead, fight all the fights that you can. I don't begrudge them not helping Muslim women. If you don't want to help us, you only want to help women in America or in Canada, that's your business, that's fine. What I begrudge them, what angers me, what infuriates me, and what I resent is that they support these same systems when it comes to Muslim women. That's what angers me. You would never put a Mormon underwear on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Why are you putting a burkini on the cover of Sports Illustrated? That's what I want them to see. I want them to see that these structures that you fight against, these women fight against them too. They're not a separate species. They're human beings just like you are. And they also deserve to have freedom and equality, just like every other woman.
Well, so Yasmin, your passion is refreshing and inspiring, and I wish we had more time right now with more questions, but I'll send it back to Anna to pull things together.
Thank you, Jasmine Martin. So just one final thing, you mentioned that you might be able to provide a free copy of your book to people who are interested in reading. How can they contact you, or how can they request it?
Yeah, so anybody who is on this webinar right now, if you just send me a message at yasminmuhammad.com, and I will email you back a link to the ebook. If you've not read my book yet, then I'll send you a free copy.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Yasmin, for joining us for the engaging conversation. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. I had a bunch of questions lined up for you.
I talk a lot.
Maybe for a next occasion. Just to let people know that at the end of the webinar, you will receive a follow-up email with an invitation to fill out a survey. Please do, if you have a chance. You can also suggest a speaker or a topic of interest to you. And finally, stay tuned for our announcement of the next webinar in June in the newsletter, as well as on our website and Facebook. And on behalf of today's team, myself, Martin, and Yasmin, thank you very much for joining us, and stay safe and connected.
Yeah. And also this this webinar will be available on our website in a week or so.
Great.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks so much, everybody, and the audience as well.
Bye.